Good afternoon and welcome on, I can't think of a better day, World Social Media Day. Welcome to Sunday Times GenNext online event in proud partnership with Gautrain. And we're going to be discussing the significance of data and analytics in youth marketing. So we've got an incredible panel that we're going to be having a little bit of a discussion with, chewing the cud over what's going on in terms of the next kind of messaging and marketing and communication that's going to be directed at our Gen Zs and our millennials. But before I introduce the panel, just once again, a very big welcome and a very big thank you, of course, to our sponsor this afternoon, the Gautrain Management Agency. So on our panel this afternoon, we're joined by Tshepo Khobe, he's the Chief Operating Officer at the Gautrain Management Agency. Refilwe Maluleka, she's the Chief Strategy Officer at TBWA and Managing Director at Yellowwood, and Zuko Mdwaba, who is the Area Vice President and Country Leader of Salesforce South Africa. If I can just get a little nod, there we go, Zuko, everybody knows who's who in the zoo. And I'm going to start with you, Refilwe. It can be a challenge to connect with Gen Zs. I think that, a lot of people are lamenting this new generation and their blasted devices, but it's important to understand them as a really pivotal part of growth of brands in South Africa as we're looking forward to the future. So with this in mind, what role do you feel data and analytics play when you're talking about youth marketing?
Hi, Bunny, and thank you for that warm introduction. I think there's two things that data analytics really, the role they should be playing when it comes to connecting with young people today. And as a side note, let me say I'm glad to hear you refer to young people as Gen Zs. Us millennials need to let it go. We are not young anymore. Those days are over. We no longer qualify.
So sad.
It is very sad. It is. But I think there's two roles that it plays. I think the first one is really around helping us identify more meaningful and relevant insights, right? The most powerful work that you can see anywhere around the world, not just here in South Africa, is always built off an insight that is, of course, true to the audience. It's relevant to them, meaning it matters. And of course, it's something that's important, right? And ideally anchored in some kind of attention or problem that your brand can solve for. And I think previously, it would require us to do, really robust kind of primary research and, spending weeks out in field. It was often incredibly expensive. So only massive brands like Salesforce there with my co-chair, Zuko, could afford to do that kind of research. But because we have data analytics, it is much more accessible and much easier to find those kind of rich insights. And the second part, of course, is around the where and the when to reach them. You no longer have to take a shot in the dark with this kind of spray and pray approach where you put something on TV and radio and hope for the best. You can be really specific about reaching Bunny at a time when she is most likely to be open to that message, when she's most likely to respond in a positive way, and in a place where she's willing to kind of engage with you and won't be annoyed. And so for me, I think it's those two things. It's the rich insights, and of course, secondly, the where and when to reach the young people of today.
So I love that you mentioned about drawing a meaningful insight from the data, but it also begs the question to me in terms of if I'm going to interact with a message or some kind of communication from a brand, I certainly hope that we have a relationship. So I'm going to come to you, Zuko, talking about the budget that you can spend on finding all of this data. How are you building relationships with the youth so that they'll become ambassadors to the message? Because you don't only want to connect with them and serve the message, you also want them to be so connected and grounded in it that they could possibly be an ambassador for your messaging, right?
True. Thanks, Bunny, and welcome to everyone. So it is, the points that Refilwe mentioned really resonate with what we see. You mentioned something around research. Definitely research informs some of the things that we find a way of pivoting in times like this. I'm sure we can all agree that we are in a new world. The past 2.5 years now have really been instrumental in creating unbelievable experience. It's been tough. but it's experiences that we've learned a lot from. You know, as a result of that, there's been incredible innovation and transformation. And what we are seeing in terms of connecting to the youth is that we are living in a world where there's new channels, there are new skills that are required, there's new regulations. I mean, regulations, we should not forget that, because there's data privacy and other things that are there. There are new stakeholders. And of course, this is all with new expectations that consumers nowadays are expecting. Not to mention the Gen Z. You have to be very politically correct. I agree with Refile when she mentioned Gen Z versus millennials. I don't want to talk about that because I'm outside both of those. So I won't I won't dwell on that. But it's good to hear that we all have a consistent way of talking about the generations. There's a lot that we have learned over the past couple of years. When you look at the Gen Z that we're talking about, they live in the social world. I mean, it's good to hear my good brother Tsepo talking about he's an Instagrammer. You know, these are the social platforms that people are living in now. You know, when you look at the Gen Z, for us to be able to be successful in connecting with them, we need to be able to leverage on that data and be able to find them where they are, which is on the social platform, on the internet. So that's what we've seen, and certainly the research that we see globally confirms exactly that. You would know, Bunny, that it's been talked about for many, many years that cell phone penetration in Africa, certainly in South Africa, is massive. And these are not just cell phones just to make a call. These are cell phones that are actually quite connected. And a big part of the consumption that's happening is social media. So to answer your question and to wrap up my answer is, it is mostly around leveraging on the data and being able to get to the youth. Another point that I'll touch on is that it's also around personalization of those, because we can't just spray and pray, like you mentioned, to all of us. So yeah, data is that new oil that we're grappling with.
Mm. So staying with the data and looking now to kind of future forward brand Gautrain, how are you using your data to your consumer engagement strategy so that you can, as you say, you know, to really get yourself entrenched and really connected with those consumers, but more specifically to the youth, as we're looking for these Gen Zs and millennials right on the cusp?
Yeah.
So when you look at, I mean, I said I'm an Instagrammer, and that's as an Instagrammer, one of the key challenges that you have is that you have to have your data and be clear about who are you speaking to, when are you speaking to them, when are they more receptive to your message, and when would they be willing to actually talk to you about the challenges and then respond. So when we started off with our social media, it was just simply us managing Twitter. You know how Twitter can get. The streets are bad there. So, and you have to be able to make sure that you can respond effectively. But we got to find that it's actually a channel from which we can speak clearly and speak from a perspective where we are able to put forward not only we apologize, you know, the system didn't run very well and all of that, but actually be able to speak before we order the, I mean, you could have, you would have seen our messages now in Youth Month. We started them early. We didn't have to wait for June 16th. It is us being able to connect. But we've started a youth brand that is specifically, you know, targeted towards that. It's called Ride with the G, and Ride with the G, you know, play on the Gautrain and go to the call it, and the big gangster, you know, kind of a thing. But when you ride with the G, it's about you knowing that we are looking after you. We are giving you discounts as the youth. We're giving you, you know, access to a card that is personalized. And we listened, and we didn't just go, okay, let's make another youth brand and put it out there. And you would have seen the marketing completely departed from our normal marketing. But behind that lies important data. And that data then became the basis on which we say, how much is enough in terms of the discount? Do you give, you know, 10%, 15%, 25%? And how much would you actually be able to make? Because ultimately we can talk about all of these things. I've got a business to run, and that business has to remain at its best. And the only way I can maintain it at its best is if it makes money. And therefore, it is about you being able to not only capture the data from what you're doing, but also convert it to dollars or to rents in this case. And then beyond that, it's us now being able to say, well, what do we do with the brand now that we've developed it? Because one of the things that they've always told me in order to call it marketing is you must never go dark. There must never ever be a time when you're not speaking to. You don't go from campaign to campaign speaking to people. You actually have to make sure that you maintain a message, the unification of the brand and the consistency of the brand speaking out there about the youth has to be maintained, and that is important when you're speaking to the youth. The data then allows you to be able to say, when do I say what, and when is it appropriate, and how do I actually communicate in the language? I mean, when we started with the Ride with the G, I mean, that sounded a bit racy for us. And for a brand like us, that sounded even a bit risky to say, oh, Ride with the G. Oh, that sounds very gangster. But then we got to find out that from actually doing surveys in its simplicity, but data for us goes beyond the youth, because if we have to put on a new buzzword, we actually have to go out there and understand who will use this route. So it's no more as everybody calls it, a spray and pray. Throw a bus out there and hope somebody takes it. We've got a, what do they call it? We're using taxpayers' money. So we have to think about it clearly. So in essence, we put out a survey, and the survey normally is never wrong. When it comes back, it will tell you, no, it's not yet time for that route. And this is the direction. And bit by bit, we can go beyond just putting out is, do we need more products? Yeah, we need more products. There's a scholar product that we're looking at, a product for retirees. I'm looking for the right politically correct term for that. So, but that is the manner in which we use our data. But our data gets used on a day-to-day basis. And I always, when I do a lot of these talks, I give an example of when there was a march in Pretoria, and we needed to be able to understand how many people actually went to the march and how many of them had used the Gautrain. And we were profiling that data every 15 minutes. Now that's like, and 15 minutes was just purely for us to be able to get some sort of a trend. And in the evening, we knew how many people had gone to Pretoria and how many of them had actually used the train. And we were able to place two trains, one at the Pretoria station and the other one at Hatfield, so that it can take up the volume. Because remember, when they were going there, they would have gone, all dispersed. But when they're coming back, they're going to come back in a volume. So the system in its normal format would not have coped. And that was actually a saving grace, because you don't want to be dealing with much after they had been complaining about somebody in order to in Pretoria. So that was, you can get it down to day to day.
Okay. Sorry, I think you're obviously going through a load shedding hotspot, or dark spot, I should say, rather. But
can I jump in quickly, Bunny, if you don't mind?
Pleasure, please.
I just want to jump in quickly on the back of what Tsepo was saying. When we look at Gen Z, it's a generation that's very skeptical of business in general, and they are not hesitant to speak up to demand change when they need change. Like the example that Tsepo was giving actually reminded me to make this point. The thing is, brands have to realize that for them to stay relevant, they need to listen to what the Gen Z folks are saying. For the youth, activism is not a recreational pastime. They are who they are because they recognize the value of social justice in their lives. As a result, brands that ignore them will suffer. And I'm actually reminded of this point on the back of what Tsepo was saying, and I just felt that it is something that's important to make. This is a smart audience, the generation that's really, really smart. They can detect insincerity and empty statements. So it is really critical. There's a lot that we can learn from them, I think, as older generations. I just wanted to make that point quickly.
No, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. And what I'm starting to hear, though, in terms of the data and the analytics, that it's so important to be able to get this data. Once upon a time, I attempted a BCom and I did not do very well with stats. So I'm allergic to numbers. But what is fascinating is that the numbers still tell a story, that you're able from the stats, from that data, which, you know, Tip was speaking about, an every 15-minute refresh, able to tell the story and really understand what's going on. That is a really deeply fascinating part of this conversation to me. I'm going to come to you, Refilwe, about, you know, both the gentlemen mentioned that, you know, young people have their finger on the pulse, that they are very switched on, they know, you know, they're very aware and alert to what brands are doing. They are very vocal about their feelings, their stance, their social morality, shall we say. But I think the other thing that's coming to light for me is, while you've got the data, while you're creating the relationships, while you're you know, meeting the demand or the question that's being had as a brand, we also need to look at what that digital experience is like. You mentioned, Zuko, that, you know, young people are living a digital life in this day and age. So, Refilwe, how do you advise clients to use data-driven research to take youth consumers on a journey? I think Tepo also mentioned quite beautifully that Ride with the G, that kind of goes alongside the youth market from a journey perspective, from a user journey perspective. What would your advice be, Refilwe, to brands?
So it's two things, you know, and I think the one is what Zuko was mentioning now, and you built on, Bunny. I think, you know, making sure you have the right skill set in terms of people who can help the data tell you that story that you're talking about, right? How do you create meaning out of that data? It is a specific skill. It's not always easy for everyone to get their heads around. And I think that that's important, so that you understand, you know, what is the data actually telling you, right? It's great that Bunny logs onto Instagram every day at 7 a.m. But if the reason she's doing that is because she likes to get her daily prayer download, or her, you know, some sort of biblical quote, maybe it's not ideal to remind her that Castle Light is having a party that night. Maybe that's not the moment to talk to her about that. And so really making sure that you have people who are able to analyze the data and give you real meaning out of it is important. And the other piece of advice that I often give, you know, the clients that we work with, is then to, whatever you get from your data and the analysis that you conduct, to always filter it through your brand. They are and it speaks to that insincerity point that the two gentlemen were speaking about. You know, it's easy to find out what's trending, what's cool, what people are interested in, what people are angry about. It's easy to find out all of those things at the drop of a hat. But it doesn't always mean that you need to say something about it. And it doesn't mean that you have a place in that conversation. And I think, you know, if you know what your brand stands for, if you know what your brand is about, and you consistently deliver on that message, not just in terms of what you say, but the actions that you take. You know, anytime you're about to make a decision to venture into a different conversation, or to take advantage of any trend, even if it's around innovation, let's say, you know, make sure you are filtering it through what your brand stands for and what your brand wants, what you want people to think and know about your brand, because, you know, possibly the most famous strategy quote in the world, you know, is that good strategy is about deciding what you're not going to do. And I don't think enough brands take that to heart. You know, you don't have to be in every conversation all the time. You don't have to have every innovation all the time. Really be quite critical about the things that are going to move your brand forward and help you connect with your consumer, and use that as the filter before you make any decisions.
Very, very nice. One of the other things that Zuko, you mentioned is about youngsters' suspicion with business. So that kind of brings me to privacy. You also mentioned privacy and data. Obviously, is a very hot topic when you're talking about data. So it's a crucial concern for the youth segment. It's a crucial concern for anybody who's using any of these platforms. Where then is the line between respecting the youth through marketing, as Refilwe mentioned, don't serve me Castle Light ads while I'm trying to get my prey on, versus reaching your goals, versus exploiting their time and attention, because that's the other tenuous thing. If you're going to look at things like the social dilemma and where our attention is really being drawn to, where do you now get that line between reaching your goals reaching the youth through your marketing and also exploiting their time or being respectful of their time and attention.
Yeah. So, Bunny, amid accelerated digital transformation and purchase personalization that I mentioned earlier, there's an increase in the number of customers that expect companies to understand their unique needs. I mean, which is just exactly what you've just alluded to. However, this comes at a cost, and the cost is what you want me to speak to. The optimization of that data and trying to understand customers better comes at a cost, and with increased data comes the need for the reassurance around privacy. And this is something that's really, really important. And I think the youth, out of all the generations, are more clear about that. You're taking my data, what are you going to use my data for? Is it going to be beneficial for me? If it's beneficial for me, you sell it to me, you tell me the idea, maybe the youth will buy into it. But if it's going to be used to Refilwe's good point, I never thought of an example like that. It's actually super, super amazing. Beer and the Bible, But what's interesting is that most customers are actually open to the use of data. And I think one of the big things that everybody talks about now, when you talk about data, there's artificial intelligence, which is there to improve the experiences of customers. But many also have those concerns that artificial intelligence, when it's used unethically, and this is the reality, it can easily be used unethically. And now Refilwe will like this because she mentioned something about research. Maybe I should just touch on some of the research that we've done from a Salesforce point of view. Part of the research tells us that 84% of our customers say AI can be a force for good or bad, depending on how it's used. And this is a huge percentage. And it just tells you exactly that if it is used for the right intention to improve the customer experience, the youth have no problem with that. But if it's used for ill gain, then there's a problem. Now, what we are faced with, basically that presents a balancing act. And the balancing act is that on one hand, customer data is needed to build trust, since it underlies functionality and addresses customer needs. But given the consequences of data misuse, and we've seen this, there's been data breaches around the world. Personal data is the most valuable asset you can have as a human being, and it's easy that it can be breached and be used for bad things. Customers actually are getting more and more cautious around how their data is used. Now, one of the things that is big and it's really growing at an exponential rate is consumers, certainly the youth, are trying to question and understand whether companies are using that data ethically. And it's quite topical. I mean, if you were to do research and search even on the internet without buying an expensive report, Refilwe, and you just research on ethical use of data, this is something that's big. It is all over the globe. Companies that understand, certainly companies like Salesforce, we understand the importance of that and the power of ensuring that we use data in the correct way. In a world where consumers want both personalization and privacy, this balance becomes very critical. We must collect personal information that we actually need. If you're researching, you're doing something, you've got my data as a consumer, and you are in the space of selling the beverage that you mentioned, Refilwe, focus on that data and not look at other data that has got nothing to do with you. Those are the conversations that are taking place, and certainly customers are challenging companies out there that their data is going to be used in an ethical manner.
So this now I would probably want to throw out as well, just as a question to anybody who wants to answer. You now really getting to the crux of, and I love this, it almost feels like opposites, but not really, personalization versus privacy.
Yeah.
How do you now straddle that? So in my ignorance about the ethical use of data, I think that POP here is the protection of all things. And now, but how do we now as a consumer be a little bit more aware to how you can really engage brands and who's really holding these brands accountable for the ethical use of the data? This is one of those in the wind questions. Am I really signing everything away by not reading the three pages worth of scroll of T's and C's with every digital experience or digital interface that I'm using. I don't know.
Yeah. I'll take the first step and then I'll leave it to you to Tsepe and Refilo. But the reason why there's POPIA out there, it's to protect us. I mean, there's POPIA, there's GDPR, there's all kinds of laws in other countries. I mean, in Europe, we talk about GDPR. It is there to protect the very data that we're talking about, or to protect everybody when it comes to data. So I think you have seen in the recent past that there's companies that are starting to get fined. You know, there's huge penalties that they would have to pay if a consumer were to raise that, or anyone that owns the data were to raise that the data was used illegally or unethically. So it is there to protect all of us.
So for me, if I were to come in here on weigh in on this issue, and there's an issue we don't talk about when we talk about protection of data and consumers trusting you. The fundamentals of the brand still has to be intact. You still have to be a brand that people can trust. And it starts there. So let me give you an example. So now lately, I build apps, and anybody who builds an app, no matter how good it looks and he sells it, he shows up and says, I must fill out a form for me to register. I'm going to lose my mind. So the normal way now is that on the front page of the app, as you open it after I've downloaded it, Instagram, Facebook, you know, any of the, what they call the social media platforms, using what we call identity conversions, making sure that you are the same person on that platform, that platform. We are able to let you register using any of those platforms that you are comfortable in being seen as, in order they call it on there. But people will not be willing to use those or give you that information from their Instagram or from their Facebook or from any of that if you're not a trusted brand. And the fundamentals of this are still, you know, marketing 101. Your brand still has to be intact, and you still have to make sure that people can trust your brand. They know that you are the kind of person who looks after your business in its entirety properly, and therefore they will be comfortable to be able to give their data without, and then be open about why you need the data. And I think that's what Zuko was raising earlier on. Don't take data you do not need. And for instance, on our ticketing system, when you use your credit card there, I never ever touch your credit card data.
Oh, looks like we've gone through another dark spot. Rufilwe, did you have something to add on this ethical use of data?
I'm just checking. It looks like Tapo's trying to come back.
Ooh.
Should I go ahead, or do you want to give him a minute?
Data goes between with go ahead.
No, I think let's move on. It's a bit garbled. Sorry, Tsepo. I think we were in a dark spot and we missed the last bit of that.
Yeah. I must be honest, Bunny, it's a difficult one for me. It's really not my area of expertise, but I do agree with you. I think, you know, one of the positive outcomes of the financial crash in 2007 and 2008 is better and tighter regulation on business than ever before. And this acknowledgement, as Zuko was saying, that, you know, unfortunately, not all businesses can always be trusted to make the right ethical decisions that are going to protect consumers, particularly if there's a large amount of money on the other side. And so I think you're right that people don't read all those T's and C's. I know I certainly never do. You know, it's 100% about what Tsepo was saying, that as long as I trust that brand and as long as they demonstrate that they give me value for my data, so my experience is significantly enhanced as a result. You know, I think it's we you know, rely on regulators and enforcers to make sure that we are always protected.
Thank you very much. So we've got a question that's from the audience that's watching us live this afternoon. And this question says, in what ways can big data analytics make youth advertising and marketing more impactful? I'm going to start with you, Rufilwe, seeing as this should be your area of expertise. Let's start with you in terms of really making that impactful, kind of on the back of the meaningful insights that you've drawn from those data analytics. How do you then make the advertising and the marketing more impactful?
Sure. So what I have seen in the last couple of years where that really works incredibly well is actually when you take two kind of pieces of data that you would have thought have nothing to do with one another, and you're able to kind of overlay them to find a surprising insight that can help you become a lot more effective. So as an example, I think it was a winner at Cannes a few years ago. One of the gaming consoles, and I'm probably going to get it wrong and get in big trouble, but I'm not sure if it was PlayStation or Xbox, but one of the gaming consoles, what they did was actually put together a partnership with Burger King, because they realized that when people are gaming, they tend to game for really long periods of time. And one of the things that prevents them from spending more time, one of their tensions, one of the frustrations is this idea of when they're going to eat. And they effectively built a platform inside the gaming platform that allowed people to be able to order takeaway while they are gaming. So somebody would kind of come into the gaming platform, which you can invite, and they would take your order and kind of deliver to your place, all without you having to ever leave the gaming platform. And I think it was that kind of overlap between understanding the audience that games and how similar they are to the audience of Burger King, the behaviors that typically people want to eat, junk food when they're doing stuff like that, and realizing that there's an opportunity for both brands to kind of partner together to enhance the gaming experience of consumers. And so I think it's that. I think it's understanding your audience and finding things that you would have never really thought about before to inspire new and interesting ways of communicating with audiences.
Do you think that has, as I'm listening to you speak, I think to myself, an older generation, not to be, we're very generationally biased in this particular conversation. Well, not really biased, just because we have to identify the different generations. But what you've described to me feels like the solution was almost come up with by a young person. And it moves into the space of making sure that these youngsters, millennials and Gen Zs, are moving into decision-making roles as it comes to, some of these strategic decisions that are made. Tsepo, I'm going to ask this to you. As the world's largest generation, do you think that decision-making in companies has shifted enough? Do you think the brands are catching up? Because that's quite a little niche that Rufilwe mentioned from a gaming perspective, but you also mentioned transport, which is obviously an age-old infrastructure about ride with the G and discounting prices according to who your target market is. But I couldn't possibly describe you as a Gen Z, although I won't ask your age. But do you think there are enough youngsters moving?
I am 17 for forever.
Lovely. Do you think that it's shifting fast enough?
No.
Is it shifting in
So
a
I'm
way
going to be honest and upfront with you. It's no. The number of people, even youngsters that come to interviews, and I ask them about data management, and I ask them about, it's just one way. Please tell me about predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. Just define first. And when you get to prescriptive analytics, so in the olden days, we used to do strategy and go and look for the data to actually fit into that strategy. In the modern day, we are not catching up because you're not going to look for data after you've created a strategy. The data will tell you what your strategy is supposed to be. And we are sitting there and sitting in boardrooms, and the number of people who, what do they call it? And when I go around speaking at conferences on data and digitization, I always say to everybody, any CEO who, what do they call it, does not understand the platform economy and does not understand how to manage data that was 5 years ago, they should have retired today. So you should retire, you should walk away. And then if you're an executive and you're not understanding this simple concept as predictive data and prescriptive data and how Data now tells you what your strategy is, not the other way around. You come up with an idea that you're going to do the following and then go and look for the data to be able to retrofit into that. That doesn't make sense. I don't know why people are still running their businesses like that. And I'm being honest and upfront. I mean, you asked the question, and I'm telling you now, people who are sitting in boardrooms today do not actually. And there was an issue raised earlier on. Listen to the youth, and I think Refilo said it, Hugo said it. Listen to the youth. They are a force to reckon with. And if you listen to them, man, your sustainability will just happen just like that. And that will come from you understanding the data you have, because a lot of people have data. It's just that they have this schizophrenic relationship with their data, which I don't understand. It's like it's there and you've been collecting it for years, but you're not using it clearly for it to tell you what. And so to answer your question in its simplicity, today boardroom executives are nowhere near in being able to understand what they need to do with their data. And then they go like, man, call that other social media youngster. You know, you must come and tell us what these people are saying on social media. Really, I'm on Instagram because I have to understand what the brand is saying. I am on LinkedIn. I have to understand what we're saying professionally to the brand.
Oh, load shedding just won't let us be great today. but I think,
If I may, I do just want to jump in a little bit because I completely agree with what Tep was saying, that we definitely, sorry, that we haven't come far enough when it comes to empowering more young people to be powerful voices in the decisions that we make. The one thing I do want to note, though, is that what I find really encouraging is the significant strides that have been made, particularly when I look at the marketing space. If I look at the last kind of 10 years or so, and the face of CMOs in listed businesses, and whether you're talking about banks or telcos or FMCGs, it is a younger face, it is a Black face, it is increasingly a female face. And so for me, that's always it's something really exciting and positive to hang on to, because it means that we are starting to move in the right direction. People who are very digitally savvy, very data savvy, exactly what Tep was talking about, and with the credibility and experience to be able to influence the business in the right direction. So as much as we're not where we should be, I am very encouraged when I start to see those kinds of movements happening in really big sectors across the country.
Yeah, and I think just to drive, I totally agree, Refilo, to drive Tsepo's point home as well around the importance of predictability or just leveraging on the data, because the data is there. Companies own this data. The data is there. It's about leveraging on that data. I'll give you a number that will probably shock you, or it'll probably shock you. From a Salesforce point of view today, as things stand, we've got a tool called Einstein. It's an artificial intelligence tool that's embedded in all our products. What it does, it creates value for our customers. There are 164 billion predictions per day across all our customers. So it's basically leveraging technology to just analyze the data and helping people learn from predictability. And then obviously human beings still need to make the decision and everything, but the data informs a whole lot of the things that people could save a lot of time just understanding what's the next best offer, what is it that they should be targeting vis-a-vis what they would traditionally be going for in terms of going to customers.
Wow, that's quite mind-boggling. I'm trying to process, what does that even mean? 164 billion predictions. What comes to mind as a layman, because that's what I'm here to do, is to make sure that everybody who is not in this tech space understands what's going on. Is that what they call the all-knowing, all-seeing algorithm? Is that why I'm served ads before I've even spoken the word? Is that what that AI is?
This is exactly that. I mean, a typical example that we all familiar with, maybe for the audience. I think there's a lot of Netflix consumers in South Africa. Netflix follows what you're doing and suggests things, and our phones now, you're typing a message and it predicts what you're going to say. It's just learning from the things that you're doing. It's the data that you own. It's the data that you have. It is just creating predictability and creating more efficiencies around some of the things that people are doing. Of course, keeping in mind what we spoke about earlier, it has to be done ethically.
Yeah, definitely. So we've spoken about decision making and including youngsters, I say youngsters, but I mean specifically millennials, who happen to be the world's largest generation, into these decision making spaces, as well as keeping them kind of front of mind when these strategies are kind of being formulated. So Tepo, I'm going to come to you in terms of there may be a little bit of neglect, even though Rufelo has given a really beautiful example of how, Gen Zs have been included in a particular kind of marketing strategy. So even though marketers may neglect our digitally native Gen Zers, the reality is that they've got enormous purchasing power and they've got enormous influence because they have this digital life. So when do marketers start including Gen Zs into their marketing strategies? As you said, perhaps, if they don't even know predictive versus prescriptive analytics, they can't exactly be in the boardroom, but they need to be, part of that strategy conversation. And how do we start including them? And when do marketers do that?
In the beginning, you don't show up with a campaign and then go and ask, oh, so how should I sell this to you? In the beginning, when you start the campaign and you start with a product, you have to include Gen Zs. You have to include everybody or all your stakeholders right at the beginning. I find it quite weird that a lot of companies still believe that they can put product out there that they didn't consult anybody about, and they haven't made an effort to be able to consult. And your data will tell you clearly. Can you hear me clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So your data will tell you that, look, these are your stakeholders. These are the people who actually consume that particular product. And these are the people that need that sort of a thing. Go and ask them, before you actually put the product into the market, go and ask them and understand what is it that they will use it for, and what other enhancements can you bring to it? And that way you are able to know. It's in the beginning. You don't do it after, but you do it throughout the process too, because from the beginning, when you're asking your stakeholders, when you launch the product, you look at your data, post the auto-regulate implementation, and even in its maturity, your ability to understand what to do with it next, it all lies in your data.
Okay. Zuko, I'm going to come to you and just on a question of innovation. So obviously from a marketing perspective, you want to include these people, these youngsters, Gen Zs and millennials right from the get-go. But can you explain the role of innovation in staying ahead of the curve in terms of how do you inspire innovation in major businesses where adapting is hard due to the scale and the size of these businesses? How do you then inspire them to prioritize this innovation that's going to get them to this very kind of information rich and consumer, the consumer that we want, these Gen Zs, the millennials that have this influence and power and money?
Yeah, thanks, Bunny. I've touched on this quite a bit when I spoke about artificial intelligence. Of course, it's not the silver bullet, but it is the overriding thing when it comes to data. We live in a world where I think a beginner's mind, creativity, and continuous learning is critical. All of us have to continuously learn, relearn, unlearn. It's just as important. Sometimes people forget to unlearn. I think Tsepo touched on some of the business leaders that are still wanting to do things like 20 years ago. So it is important to unlearn and relearn all the time. Innovation is key when it comes to things like this, and I'm not saying this because I'm in the technology space, but invariably we live in a world that's really, really getting more and more technological or digital. When you look at digitization, everything that we do, if you look at data or artificial intelligence, it is a big part of the fabric of our daily lives, even more pronounced with younger generations. So in terms of innovation, I would say it is important to do the things that have been mentioned by my fellow panelists already. Understand your data. Number one is to understand that your data you own, you have the data, but you need to take it a level higher to have the right tools or the right partners or the right technology to get you to understand how to leverage on that data so that you can be relevant. There is absolutely no point in going to market and driving something because you caucused in a boardroom and you think this is what you should be targeting. This is what you should be going to market with everyone. It is important that companies leverage their data, understand, we live in a world now where people can crowdsource a whole lot of information. There's the data that you have, and there's data that's external, there's data that's industry, there's data that's this. You take that, you bring it together, and it tells a story about how you should be more relevant as a company. So I don't know if that answers your question around innovation. And these are technologies that are there today. But innovation is not only about technology. Innovation is also about the creativity, about how we think, how we, like I said, have a beginner's mind, not I know it all.
Yes, definitely. That's definitely coming through. That's actually the kind of innovation we need, is really kind of tangible, almost like abstract, in the sense that you start from the beginning, you get the data, you interpret the data, and move from there.
Sorry, Benny, I think, Zuko raises such a good point. And one of the most exciting things about this age of data and digital and all of these fancy things that we live in is the ability to try things at relatively low risk and cost, more so than ever before. I think 15, 20 years ago, turning out an innovation, could be a 3-year process and costs an enormous amount of money. And so it is very high risk. And I think one of the benefits of the era we're in now is that you can actually try things. You can innovate in big and small ways, whether it's the experience customers have, whatever it is. And I'm not sure that enough brands are taking advantage of that. The ability to just try something. I think consumers, especially young consumers, respond to that, right? They respond to brands who are trying things and are dynamic. And I think there's a real opportunity to explore that further.
I like that. Responsive, basically, to the data that you're collecting and moving accordingly. So what would you say are some of the key takeouts from the GenNext 2021 research? And have you seen a shift in consumer behavior in 2022?
It's a good question. So the research from us from last year, and I never know if people are aware that the GenNext survey is kind of in 2 parts, right? So yes, it is about coolest brands. And I know that that's what marketing people typically are looking out for, who's on top of the pops this year. But the other part of it, which in my view is even more important as a marketer, is a youth behavior study, right? Where we talk to 7,000 young people across the country to find out what matters to them, what's driving them, the things that they're worried about, and really start to mine for meaningful insights that can help you rise the ranks of the GenNext, of the coolest brands. And what was really interesting for me last year was this idea of young people are under an enormous amount of pressure from all angles. And I think Zuko and Sapo both spoke about it earlier, that their reality is a difficult one. Whether you're talking about, the ability to not trust the people who you should be able to trust. So whether that's government or private sector or whoever it is, there's just an enormous sense of anxiety around, who are the people and institutions that I can trust. A huge amount of uncertainty around their future and even their day-to-day lives. And so really we're seeing higher than ever levels of anxiety around a number of things. Yes, the conventional, I want my parents to be okay and be around to raise me, to really heightened levels of fear around things like being the victim of gender-based violence. And really at higher levels than we've ever seen it before. And so when we start to think about all of this anxiety and what's coming out of last year, there were 3 things that I thought were really important for brands to think about in terms of the role they can play in young people's lives. The brands that were really doing well were those that did 3 things. So one were completely authentic, right? So, and by authenticity, I know it's a buzzword, but it just means kind of do what you say you will, So if you say you are a brand that stands for empowerment, do that. If you say you're a brand that stands for, I don't know, good times, do that. And don't say that you stand for one thing if you're not going to deliver against it. So authenticity was a big driver of successful brands last year. And it's something that young people are desperate for because it's so hard to find in their day-to-day space. So that was a really big outcome from last year around are brands being authentic enough? The second one was around accessibility. I think, and I think we underplay it, but it can be frustrating to have all these brands talk to you all the time, but then you can't find them. They're either not available or you can't afford them. That's a big one. Or they're just not present in your world in some way. And I think just kind of show up, be present in people's lives in a way that they can find you and afford you and feel your presence. And the last insight coming out of last year, so yes, authenticity, yes, be accessible. And the third one was around community. People are finding ways to connect in meaningful ways with probably very different audiences than we ever did before. Previously, young people, your community was the people in your physical area, right? At school, at home, your family. But what the internet has done is mean that you can be a part of more communities than you ever were before. You can be a part of a skateboarding community or a hip hop community or a Converse sneaker community. It doesn't matter. But these are places where you find connection. And I think brands that are able to play a role in building and strengthening those communities in some way really do connect with young people, and they feel like you're adding something to their experience. And I think those three things are probably the biggest takeouts from the research last year.
Thank you very much. And Tsepo, I'll ask you this as our kind of closing question. What for you are the key most important factors in data analytics and consumer behavior driven based analytics?
So for me, what is important is just not having the data. It's about gleaning insight from that data. So data, you can have it and it will just look at you and you will look at it. And it will be a stand down between you and the data. It won't do anything. It's about you being able to glean insights from it. But beyond that is how does the data help you become more you? And when I'm saying become more you, Peter was talking about ourselves do the same thing. Data be something completely different, but can we find in our data the ability to still serve the young generation with the same product, but understand their pain points? And for instance, when we launched our Ride with the G campaign or the student product, we knew everybody was saying your product, we cannot afford it and also other things. And that's our thing that refers just raised now. And it's about you being able to go out there, get this data, understand its inside, and then understand how you become more you. And I think authenticity these days, everybody assumes that now you have to alter your product. I believe in essence, it's how do you use data to become more you? Or in actual fact, understand if you are irrelevant or have become irrelevant as a product. Because that is also true. In certain cases, you're trying to be more you, but more you that nobody is buying anymore. So for me, it's about being able to get the insights. Thank you.
So to wrap up, we've got two questions that is actually forms part of a competition that we've been running this afternoon. So some of our viewers this afternoon have been sharing their competitions, and there's a little prize at the end of it. So if I can ask quickly a question for Refulwe from Leicester. He wants to know more about segmentation and how to talk to Gen Z databases in order to connect with them. If you can give me a quick overview on Leicester's question, Refulwe.
I love it. A quick overview on segmentation. Good grief. Goodness, I think maybe the quickest answer I can give Leicester in that space is that what data should empower you to do in the world of segmentation today is to segment far beyond demographics. Demographics are arguably less and less relevant, and how you really make use of segmentation is to rather find common interests and things that common drivers, things that people are equally passionate about, or things that people are equally angry about, one could also say, and using that as a lever with which to decide how you're going to engage with people. And I think we are always determined to hang on to segmentation in the demographic space, which definitely has value. I'm not saying don't do it, but I think that's probably where the real opportunity lies, particularly with young people who often their demographic situation is not always a reflection of their interests and passions and where they want to get to in life.
Really lovely. That was beautifully succinct. Thank you so much. And I hope that Lester is satisfied with that answer, because I think it's not something I had thought about actually. In a radio space, for an example, we're very hung up on our demographics because we think that that's the only way that the data can be dissected. But as you're saying, the segmentation goes beyond that. And then the demographic starts to spread over shared interest, which is fascinating, really fascinating. Another question for the win this afternoon to Tsepo, the question being, how much buying power young people have? He's asking, how much do they have and where are they spending most of their time in a digital age?
So if you look at the GenNext survey in itself, it will tell you that the brands that they vote to be the best are the ones that they are spending most of their money on. So as I've always said, the combo that works is
No load shedding formed against us will prosper. I suppose I see we've got Zugo back. Zugo, are you back in the room?
I'm back. I just don't know for how long. I mean, it's possible.
Yeah, no load shedding formed against us. We've just got 1 minute for you to perhaps answer this question where Tsepo was unable to, as he's hit a dark spot. The question was about the buying power that young people have and where they're spending most of their time in a digital age. Could you shed some light on that as we're rounding things up this afternoon?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm getting the question. So you're talking about the buying power of the youth?
Yes. So one of the question from one of our viewers is, how much buying power do young people have and where are they spending most of their time in the digital age?
I think there's a lot of literature on that or research that's around how young people are basically the future of a number of companies, regardless of what industry it is. I mean, again, obviously, I lost a little bit of context as I got cut off. But again, it's all about turning data into meaningful moments. And those meaningful moments, those are what the youth are really, really serious about. They don't compromise on that. They buy what they need to buy. And they're not buying for the sake of buying. I mean, if we look at the transport industry, for example, or the automotive industry, the traditionalists were very big in, I want to own a car, I want to do that. The youth got totally different priorities. And, when you look at Tsepo's organization, for example, the youth, as long as there's that convenience, they are happy to do that. They are happy to live in this Uberized environment that we now have. There's even questions around, do I need to own a house? Do I need to own this? So the consumption is very, very different. They don't necessarily want to have this ego-driven. Maybe it's a bit harsh saying ego-driven. Someone wants to own something. They don't want to own it. As long as they can subscribe to something, subscribe a service. If they're not happy with that service, they jump on to the next one. I'm not sure if that answers your question, Pani. I hope it does.
Perfectly. No, it really does. Thank you very much. And I'd just like to say thank you again to all three of our panelists, Refilwe, to Zuba, as well as to Tsepo, for lending your time and your expertise and the information and insights, of course, of the experience of your various industries. Again, a massive thank you to the Gautrain Management Agency that's been the big partner here, sponsoring this discussion for us and facilitating it and making it happen. So I'd like to thank you all for watching as well and joining us at the Sunday Times GenNext online event. To the next one. And thank you very much. Have yourselves a lovely afternoon.
Thank you.